everyone, and welcome to Vital Tips and Tricks for Taking the DAT. We're just going to give it a few more seconds for everybody to hop on, okay, before getting started. All right, it looks like most everybody is on. Hi, everyone, and welcome, like I said, to Vital Tips and Tricks for Taking the DAT. Let's see. Just sharing the slides right now. And we can go to the next slide. Thank you. So my name is Raven King, and I will be the moderator for this evening. Currently, I am a rising D3 at the Virginia Commonwealth University. Today was actually my first day as a D3, so that was super exciting getting into clinic. And I currently serve on the ASDA Board of Trustees as the District 4 trustee. So as we're wrapping up predental month here at ASDA, we're excited to share with you what predental membership is all about. When I was a predental member, ASDA allowed me to get connected to dental students before I even was one and allowed me to build a solid network. I can tell you that mentorship is 100% worth it because it is a big resume boost, and it came up in every single one of my dental school interviews. It was a huge talking point, and so I can't recommend it enough. And I was able to build my leadership skills throughout my ASDA predental experience, which ultimately is what got me to my leadership position with ASDA today. So diving into the actual predental membership benefits, being a predental member automatically gets you a copy of ASDA's Getting Into Dental School Guide, which provides vital admission information on every single dental school in the US. That was huge for me when I was applying. I definitely looked at it for all the programs when I was coming up with my list of schools to look into, and it was just a guiding source for me, so really awesome there. It also has application tips, interview preparation, financial planning guidance, and more. And all predental members will also receive regular communications from ASDA that include event information such as this, resources, networking tips, and topics related to getting into dental school. And finally, one of the newest benefits that ASDA has created for predental membership is the Mentor Match program. So throughout the year, predental students can sign up to be paired with a dental student mentor to help them better prepare for dental school. And so any ASDA predental member who is interested can scan the QR code, which is on the screen now, to be paired with a mentor. And the next match will take place in June, so now's the time to register for this program. So make sure to scan that QR code, take a picture of it, however you need to keep it. And so getting into tonight's program, we will be discussing vital tips and tricks for taking the DAT. You may have submitted questions for our panelists when you register, but you are also welcome to enter questions into the chat throughout the webinar. And many of the questions you all have will likely be answered during the presentation, and if not, we will try to get to them at the end. And so now it is my pleasure to introduce tonight's speaker, Nick Kusong, who serves as ADA Senior Manager, Test Administration and Production Systems.
Excellent. Thank you, Raven. Thank you, everyone, for being here. I will share my screen and get this started. Okay, so the way that I have structured the presentation I'm going to give is sort of chronological, well, both through the DAT and how students interact with the DAT. So I will go from beginning to end. So the studying piece will be sort of in the middle, and then I'll get to taking the test and how to prepare for that towards the end, just before we take questions, and then I'll go into the scoring. Because if you are not aware, there is a recent scoring change to the DAT that I will give some detail on as well. I'd like to start with the history of the DAT, because I do think that it's interesting to know. So development began in 1945, and the first administrations of the DAT were in 1950, I believe. What dental schools were observing at that time is that between 1 in 5 and 1 in 4 of the students that they admitted to their dental schools would not graduate. So they had an attrition rate between 20 and 25%, which is pretty astronomical for any level of education, but certainly for post-grad education like dental school. And so they wanted a test to better assess how well someone was prepared to deal with the rigors of dental school. So they approached the American Dental Association, and they began putting together this test. The test has gone through a number of changes. Obviously, in 1950, it was not computerized as it is now. And so it included, as it says there, starting in 1972, a chalk carving section that was sort of like the perceptual ability test, or it was intended to test the same skills or similar skills as the perceptual ability test does now. When I first started at the ADA, one of the directors here, when he took the DAT, they mailed the chalk carvings to be scored, and his broke in transit while it was in the mail twice. And so he had to go back and carve it again twice before eventually being able to get his score. The score scale originally also went from -1 to 9, and then in 1988 it was changed to the 1 to 30 score. I forgot to update where it says current. That is not the current score. That was the score until March 1st of this year, which was certainly better. I can't imagine how discouraging it would have been to get a negative on a test you took. When people in standardized testing think about building a test, these are the factors that go into putting tests together. So the purpose of the test drives everything that then comes after it, from how the test is administered to how it is scored to how the scores are disseminated to how they're reported to people. And so the focus for the DAT is on differentiating students from one another, whereas eventually, once you get into dental school, you'll have to take the Integrated National Dental Board exam. And that is not an admission test. It is a licensure exam. It's a pass-fail exam. And so they are calibrated very differently, because for the DAT, we're really trying to differentiate between students at the top end of the performance, whereas with the licensure exam, when you're doing a pass-fail exam, especially for competence like the national boards, the focus is on the lower functioning people, because you really want to differentiate between who is qualified and who is not qualified to safely practice dentistry. We do a number of surveys with the dental schools to see how students are doing in dental school and how that compares to their DAT scores, and a number of other sort of benchmarking tools that we use like that. And what they show is that there is a significant correlation between how well someone does on the dental admission test and how well they perform in dental school. So I am sure to a lot of people it seems very arbitrary to have to take a test like this, but as I showed on the slide before, that with the attrition rate then compared to now, where I think it's below 1% attrition in dental schools now. That from our perspective, the test does certainly serve a purpose. The first thing that you will do as you are preparing to take the DAT, and a lot of you have probably done this already, so I will just go through very quickly, is register for your dent pin. And the website where you would do that is the ADA website. On ada.org, there is a link that says dent pin, or you can just go straight to ada.org/dent pin. It's an 8-digit personal identification number. That is what you will use to sign in to our system to submit your application. It's also how you'll sign in to see your scores. It is the number that you'll use to schedule your appointment once you're able to schedule, and the number will follow you through your whole dental career. It is what you will use when you come back to take the Integrated National Board. If you 30 years from now are moving from one state to another, it's the number you will use to request to have your scores sent to a different state. And then there's the DAT website itself, which I would highly recommend if you have not already to familiarize yourself with the different facets of ada.org/DAT. The candidate guide is located on this website, as well as a number of other resources and documents that we make available. The guide includes all the rules that you will be expected to know and understand as you go through the test and when you show up to take it. So it may seem laborious. I know that it is a very dry 40-page document, but I do highly recommend that everybody who take the test read it. It happens a few times a week that somebody ends up in some trouble because they weren't aware of a rule that they violated that either cost them money because they didn't end up being able to take the test, or they did something that resulted in their score being voided at the test center. So these are the current fees for the test listed there at the bottom of the page. When you submit your application to take the DAT, generally it'll be processed right away. It's an entirely electronic process, so it all goes very quickly. If you applied right now, your eligibility would begin today and then would go for 6 months. So you would have from now until the end of November in which to take the test. The test is administered by a company called Prometric Test Centers. They have test centers throughout the world, but we administer them in North America and the U.S. territories. One thing to be aware of that has come as a surprise to some people and sort of off-put them when they showed up at the test center is they do biometric check-ins. They fingerprint you and they will check your ID, not just the first time you go into the test center, but anytime you take a break, you go to the bathroom or anything like that, you will have to show your ID to get back in. The score report fee is listed there, but it's not particularly applicable for the dental admission test. When you submit your application to take the DAT, it gives you the option of selecting as many dental schools as you want to send your scores to, and that fee is included. The fee for that is included in the application fee. So realistically, unless you were sending your scores to a program that wasn't a dental school for whatever reason, that's the only reason you would have to pay the score report fee. I highly recommend that you do select to have your scores sent to every dental school. There's a button you can just hit that says select all. I would highly recommend doing that since it's free at the time of application. I know sometimes people think that they want to see their score before deciding whether to send it or not. But I wouldn't recommend that, because even if you get a score that's lower than you would like and you're planning on taking the test again, when we send scores, we send all scores. So even if you take the test then a second time, they'll see both scores when we do send them. So from my perspective, there is not a purpose of waiting. And so I do recommend that everyone save the money that it costs to request to have scores sent later and just mark all of them when you submit your application to take the test. There is a score audit that is available. If you feel the score you got is lower than it should be, you can request the score audit. I do not recommend that anyone submit the score audit. All scores are audited for accuracy before we post them. So the likelihood that they would change in a subsequent audit is extremely low. And then finally, there is an eligibility extension. If you are coming up to the end of your 6-month window of eligibility, and you're just not going to be able to take the test, but you'll be able to take it soon, you can submit a request and have that 6-month window extended by an additional 45 days, which is obviously preferable to having your 6-month window expire and then having to submit the full fee again. We do offer testing accommodations in accordance with the Americans with Disabilities Act. If you have any reason that you would require accommodations, the way that it works is what we want to see is a recommendation for specific accommodations from a diagnostic professional. Usually it'll be a doctor or a psychologist, psychiatrist, somebody like that, whoever did the testing to assess whatever it is that you are requesting accommodations for, whether it be ADHD or dyslexia, or you hurt your back and need to be able to stand up and stretch periodically during the test. Essentially, if it is a reasonable request and it is something we are able to do, and you can provide documentation that shows that you would benefit from having those accommodations, we will grant them. The way that you do this is there's a question on the application for the test that asks if you are requesting testing accommodations. If you mark yes, at the end of the application, it will have you fill out a form and give you the chance to upload the supporting documentation. If you don't have it ready, you don't have to submit it with your application to take the test. You can always sign into your account and submit it at a later time. We do not share with anyone that you took the test with accommodations that would violate the Americans with Disabilities Act, to the point where once we tell you you're approved to test with accommodations, we will never tell anyone that, including you. We've had it come up where students have reached out to us a year or two later saying that they need proof that they took the DAT with accommodations to get accommodations on a different test that they're trying to take, and we will not give that documentation. I would also note that that's not legal. You can't deny someone accommodations just because they have not tested with accommodations in the past, or refuse to provide documentation showing that they tested with accommodations in the past. The DAT is a computerized test, as I said, which is taken at Prometric, anywhere in the US or Canada and US territories. This is the structure of the test, including the minutes. It is a total of 5 hours and 15 minutes. I believe the appointments are allotted for 5.5 hours, just to allow a little bit of extra time. The DAT guide includes very detailed test specifications. And so again, I would highly recommend that you go and read those over to make sure that the material that you're studying is covering everything that is going to be on the test. Anything that changes about the test will also be posted on the website. Not everything that you see within the scope of the examination within the DAT guide is guaranteed to be on the test, but you will not see anything on the test that isn't listed in the guide. So it's the best way to get a comprehensive idea of the questions that you may be faced with. As I get into the studying section, I always give the disclaimer that we do not endorse any third-party study materials or courses or practice tests, which is not to say that they aren't helpful. We hear from students in the survey that they take at the end of the test all the time. One of the things we ask is, how did you prepare? What was most helpful in preparing? And a lot of them swear by some of the third-party courses and information that are available. We are just not in a position to be able to endorse any of them because none of them got their information from us. And we have had it come up that students have gotten themselves in some trouble because things they were told by test preparation companies were not accurate. And so they had expectations for the test experience or the test itself that were not true. And we heard about that because they were upset with us that they ended up getting bad information from the third-party organizations. Another thing I would say is that there isn't a magic formula for getting a high score on the DAT. There is no material that I could point you to or that anyone could point you to that will guarantee that you are going to get a high score on the DAT. The test is designed to be an accurate reflection of your ability level, which is something that I will talk more about here on this page. So what you study should certainly cover all of the information that is going to be on the test, but you should also make sure that it is crafted to how you learn. And that's going to likely involve talking to your teachers and potentially other students for help identifying your areas of strength and weakness. And then I always recommend that people set a study plan that reflects that. You want to know that the way that you're preparing and the information that you're studying in order to prepare are giving you the best chance to succeed. And then again, know the rules. I just want to make sure that nobody gets their score voided because of something that happened. So make a plan and give yourself time, I think, are two of the most important pieces of this. I think students really underestimate the negative impact that anxiety has on test scores. It's really crucial. Sorry about that. Can somebody let me know where I was when I dropped off? Was it just at the study tips page?
I believe you were just talking about how anxiety plays into test taking.
Okay, great. So didn't really miss much. Okay. Okay. So yeah, it comes up a lot when I talk to students, and I think it is crucial, really crucial, to be confident and calm when you go to take the test. Any anxiety that you have is taking up brain space that you would otherwise be able to dedicate to the test. And so I think a big part of feeling confident on the test day is having given yourself enough time. I don't think that it's a good idea to cram for a test like the DAT. And so be realistic when you're setting your plan. You know yourself. Don't say you're going to study for 6 hours a day if you're not going to study for 6 hours a day. And I can't tell you how long you should prepare to take the test. I have talked to people who studied for 2 weeks and got a high score on the test. Alternatively, I have talked to people who gave themselves 8 weeks to prepare for the test and got a high score. I think it all depends on how confident you feel in the material. I would say the average that I hear from students is probably between 4 and 6 weeks of preparation that they gave themselves, like really dedicated preparation for the test. And so I bring that up because I don't think it's something that students have always thought about as they're heading in to take the DAT. We do offer a number of resources that I think will be helpful. There is a practice test that the ADA offers. There is a tutorial that Prometric offers that will familiarize you with how the test works on their computers so that is not new to you when you show up at the test center. They're also on the website, if you're looking for additional sources to study from, there is a list of reference textbooks that the subject matter experts who put the questions together compiled for us. Those are the reference texts that they consult when coming up with the questions where that is applicable. Obviously, there is not a reference text for the perceptual ability test in the same way that there are for the academic sections of the test. The reschedule policy for Prometric is laid out here. You can reschedule your test or cancel your appointment up to 24 hours in advance, but it has to be a business day. So if your test is on a Monday, if your test is 8 a.m. Monday, you have to have canceled or rescheduled by 8 a.m. the Friday previous. If you have an emergency, something comes up, we are not going to penalize you for that. If you could not reasonably be expected to take your test because there was an emergency or you got sick, you just have to let Prometric or us know that happened, and we will get you set up to schedule a new appointment. Similarly, we wouldn't force you to pay to have an eligibility extension if you couldn't test right at the end of your 6-month window because you got ill or had an emergency. These are some of the rules that students have run afoul of in my time with the ADA. So I want to make sure that everybody understands that you will need to show up to the test center with 2 IDs. The primary of which needs to be government issued, can't be expired, and has to have your picture, name, and signature, generally a driver's license or passport or now real ID. Would work. The secondary form of ID does not need to be government issued, though it does need to be current. It can't be expired. It can be anything that includes your name and signature. So most often we see people use credit cards or debit cards for that, as long as it has your signature on the back. You can also present two primary IDs, and that'll be fine. A driver's license and a passport would work fine. Probably the biggest rule that people run into is that they accessed their locker during an unscheduled break. When you show up, they will give you a locker. You will put everything other than your IDs into the locker. The only things you're allowed to take into the testing room itself are your IDs. Everything else goes into the lockers that they gave you. You cannot access any of that while test content is live. During the breaks that you have, the scheduled breaks between sections during the test, it is acceptable to access your locker, but you absolutely cannot do that if you're on an unscheduled break. It happens a couple times a year at this point that somebody, not thinking about it, went to their locker, and really there's no way for us to know what they were doing. But on the off chance that they were looking at study materials or looking something up on their phone, that is an easy way to have your scores voided and to have to pay to take the test again. If anything happens during the test, if you feel like the computer isn't functioning properly or anything is going on that you feel is negatively affecting your ability to take the test, stop testing immediately. Make the test center staff aware of it, and do not resume testing until they have fixed whatever the issue is to your satisfaction. I think students have the perception that we would want them to power through the test, or that they will not be given the opportunity to retest if something was going wrong. And the opposite is the case. We do not want you to test if there is something happening that is negatively impacting your experience. As I said, stop testing immediately. If they are unable to fix the issue to your satisfaction, stop testing entirely. Just leave the center within 5 business days. Let us know. The email is testingproblems@ada.org. And we will investigate. As long as we can confirm what you say happened, then we will get you set up to retake the test. One of the recent changes with the scoring switched from being 1 to 30 to being 200 to 610-digit increments. And as a part of that, students no longer receive an unofficial score report at the test center. And that was probably a bigger change even than the score change itself. So I think students were very used to getting those unofficial score reports. And I know that ADSAS at least used to ask students to input those unofficial scores onto their applications. So just be aware, that is not a malfunction. That is as designed. You will not receive that unofficial score at the test center. What takes the time between your test and when we release the scores is the auditing that I mentioned earlier. We audit the scores for accuracy, and so it can take up to 4 weeks for official scores to be posted. A common question is, how far in advance should people take the test? I always recommend 1 month before any deadline for your scores, just to give as much leeway as possible for the scores to get where they need to be. If you are someone who is here who took the test under the former scoring model prior to March 1st and got a 2-digit score, be aware that we did convert those scores from 2-digit scores to 3-digit scores and communicated that to ADSAS. ADSAS is only going to show 3-digit scores from now on, but that should be taken care of if you tested under the 2-digit score model and have your scores sent now. That'll be taken care of for you. We will convert the scores. There is a conversion scale on our website that you can consult that'll show you what the 2-digit score is in the 3-digit score. Another question that I've gotten about the new scoring model. So we went from what was called a 2PL scoring model to a 3PL scoring model. And one of the things that a 3PL scoring model does is try to account for guessing in a way that the 2PL model didn't. And so basically, if anyone who takes the test should get 25% of the questions correct, even if they're guessing on every single question. There's 4 answers. It's all multiple choice. So someone guessing should be able to get 25% of the questions correct. The new scoring model tries to account for that. Because of that, I've had students ask if there is now a penalty for guessing, because we used to communicate that there is no penalty for guessing. And I would still say that that is true. A blank question is the same in terms of scoring as an incorrect answer. They are treated the same. So that it makes sense to give a response for each question, even if you are guessing. And as I mentioned earlier, there's no passing or failing scores. There is a very in-depth, if you are curious about the switch between the 2 scoring models, the one that was used to come up with the 2-digit scores versus the one that is now used to come up with the 3-digit scores, on the DAT website is something called the DAT User's Manual. There's also a technical report. They go into a lot of detail, more detail than you probably would ever want to know about how a standardized test is scored. But so if you are curious about that, I would direct you there. If you have to retake the test, if you don't like the score that you got, you must wait 60 days between tests, with a maximum of 4 in any 12-month period. Once you've taken the test 3 times, you have to provide documentation that proves you are actively applying to dental schools. Copy of an ADSAS application is fine. After you've taken the test 5 times, you are limited to 1 test per 12-month period, and none of that can be appealed. That is all set in stone. I have gotten the question enough times doing this webinar that I now just include it on the slide. Students wanted to know if it looks bad to the dental schools that you took the test multiple times. And while I cannot say for certain how the dental schools interpret multiple test attempts, I can tell you that I looked into it, just looking at the number of people who take the national boards and how many times they took the dental admission test. And it looks like about a third of dental students, or a third of people who take the national boards, took the dental admission test multiple times. So from my perspective, I would say that means that it isn't going to keep you out of dental school if you took the test multiple times. I think that mostly the schools are looking for a higher score. So if you take the test and get a worse score, I think that would look bad. But if you take the test and get a better score, I don't think that would count against you as you're applying. These are some of the resources that I want to reiterate. So I would strongly encourage, if you have a pre-health advisor, to consult with your pre-health advisor. Also, the faculty at your school in getting tips on how to prepare for the test. The application, the guide, frequently asked questions. Basically anything you would want to know about the DAT is on our website, ada.org/DAT. There's also a good amount of information on Prometric's website. One thing that I will say about retesting that I forgot to mention earlier, if you are going to retake the test, this goes back to the study tips. The one that I had that was studied differently. I have had people tell me a lot that, oh, I studied, I took the test once and then I studied so hard for a month and a half before I took it again. And then I got the same score. That is actually the most likely outcome. Unless you felt that there was material on the test that you were not prepared for, just studying the same material you were studying more is probably not going to change your score. And as I said, the test is designed to accurately measure your ability level. So the way to think about it is, if you're taking the test again to get a higher score, you need to raise your ability level. And just doing the same studying that you were doing before is very unlikely to do that. It is difficult to raise your DAT score again, unless you felt there was information on the test you had not encountered while studying, it is very difficult to see a significant score increase. It is very common, more common than scores change. They stay the same for people who take the test multiple times. So if you have any questions, you can always contact the Department of Testing Services at the ADA. That is our phone number, and the email is datexam@ada.org. That is also my personal email if there's anything specific to this webinar that you wanted to ask me about. And with that, I am happy to take any questions that anybody has.
Thank you, Nick, for all this great information and sharing your expertise and wisdom on the DAT. I wish I had this information available when I was taking the DAT just a few years ago. So really great stuff tonight. We did have a lot of great questions come in, so we will transition now to the Q&A segment. So the first question that was asked was, how long are DAT scores good or active for?
That is a question for the dental schools, and I don't think that there is a uniform answer. The shortest that I've ever heard is 2 years, that they want to see scores from within the past 2 years. We would never consider the scores to be invalid. We will send them anytime anybody asks us to. But I would say generally between 2 and 5 years, probably. Again, 2 is the shortest that I've ever heard a dental school wanting or insisting on getting DAT scores.
And the second question to come through was, are there any fees associated with extended eligibility or accommodations?
There are no fees associated with testing accommodations. That would also be a violation of the Americans with Disabilities Act. You can't charge people more for a test because they require accommodations. There are, with the eligibility extension, it's a $145 fee for a 45-day extension to the 6-month window of eligibility. If there are extenuating circumstances that prohibited you from testing during your 6-month window, you can, based on that, request an extension. And if we agree that you could not reasonably have been expected to test because of whatever it was that was going on, you can get a free extension. But there is the one that you can pay for if you just didn't feel prepared.
And is it possible to make edits to the schools I have applied to or add accommodations after I have signed up to take the test?
It is not possible to edit the list of schools that you selected to take the test. It's just too laborious. There's too many dental schools, and if we allowed that, having to add one by one or remove them one by one would be too laborious for staff. You can always add schools, but I would mention that if you select any school, even just one school, to receive your scores, we will send the scores to ADSAS. That's what triggers us to send the scores to ADSAS. And most, if not all, dental schools don't look at what we send them. They want to see what's on ADSAS. And so as long as you picked one dental school, there probably isn't a need for you to add any to your DAT application. And then what was the second part of that question?
So is it possible to make edits to the schools I have applied to or add accommodations?
Yes, it is possible to add testing accommodations, even if you have an appointment scheduled, although you have to cancel the appointment in order for us to add the accommodations. But yes, as long as you haven't taken the test yet, you can always request accommodations.
Next one asked, can we bring items into the test center such as water, chapstick, watches, etc.?
Into the test center, yes. You can bring anything you want into the test center. Into the testing room, no. Anything you bring with you other than the 2 IDs you present them will have to be put in the lockers and will have to stay there until your test is done. So you can bring whatever you'd like. You just can't bring it into the testing area. That is an accommodation that you can request. If somebody has to have water or diabetic supplies is a pretty common one. So if you have a need to have something with you in the testing room, you can request accommodations for that. But otherwise, it all has to stay in the locker.
What is the latest you could plan to take the DAT this cycle and still be competitive with your application?
I think that depends on the deadlines for the schools that you're trying to get into, but I would say probably the end of July. Based on previous cycles, you definitely want to make sure that your scores, if you're applying on this ADSAS, I would say you definitely want to make sure your scores are in by mid to late August at the absolute latest, and potentially even earlier than that. But so I would say late July is probably the latest that you would want to test.
What happens when your DAT eligibility expires?
So we would close the application in our system, and then you would have to submit a new application, and you would get a new 6-month window of eligibility. So I would say definitely do not apply too far in advance. You don't want to run up against the end of your 6-month window of eligibility. I generally recommend applying 2 to 3 months before your desired test date, maybe a little bit further out if you have a very specific date that you need to take the test. But since most students test over the summer, I would say about now, April or May is when you want to submit your application. But if the eligibility expires, we just close it and you have to submit a new one.
I think that covers most or all of the questions that we had come into the chat. Nick, thank you again so much for all of your wisdom and advice. This is seriously such a huge help, I know, for students. Like I said before, I really wish I had something like this when I was a pre-dental student. And so hearing it now, how the test is changing, is seriously such great information for students to know going into taking the exam. We had a great time hosting you tonight. Thank you all so much for participating and vital tips and tricks for taking the DAT. And please be sure to register to join us on Thursday evening for the pre-dental seminar covering important topics, including financial planning, interview tips, and more advice on prepping for the DAT, all led by experts in their fields. And you can register at the link that will be listed in the chat. Don't forget to follow ASDA on Instagram to find out all of the latest ASDA happenings, event registrations, and more. The handle is at Dental Students, and the direct link can be found also in the chat listed by Kristen. Thank you. ASDA is here to support you throughout your pre-dental and dental school journey. Please reach out to us at membership@asdanet.org with any questions. And please visit asdanet.org/join to become a member. That will be linked in the chat as well. And thanks again for participating tonight, and we'll see you on Thursday at the seminar and or other future pre-dental membership events. Thank you all so much and take care. Have a great night. Thank you again, Nick.
Yeah, thanks everybody.